All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and joining in a timely fashion. I am grateful that you joined me on this Tuesday afternoon for our session today on trauma-informed and healing-centered mentoring. I am your facilitator, Renee Angelo Mock, the Program Outreach and Support Manager for the Maryland side of Mentor Maryland, DC. Please let us know who you are and where you're coming from here in the chat. So I can get to know you, so you all can make connections as well. That is one of the purposes of bringing you all together here. So I am very appreciative of your giving your time today to talk about this topic and to connect with Mentor Maryland DC. And if you're not familiar with who Mentor Maryland DC is, we are a non-partisan organization that aims to, galvanize the mentoring movement across Maryland and DC. And we aim to be your local mentoring experts, to bring topics like this to light and to ensure that you all have everything you need to do your best work on the front lines with our youth and families and connect mentors who want to do that work, with our young people. And whatever those resources may be, whether those look like the human resources, the people, whether it's connecting with the powers that be, our legislators. It is the primaries here in Maryland, if you weren't aware. There's still time to get out there and vote. Raising public awareness and the like. So if you are in Maryland or DC and anything mentoring and you need support, please reach out to us. We have lots to offer, and if you're not familiar with us already, we are always support for you. Cool. And again, those 3 buckets of work for us, our quality work, things like this, ensuring that you have what you need to do your absolute best work. Our quantity work, ensuring you have enough of that, enough mentors. We're working to build capacity with school districts to ensure that our school districts, because that's where our kids are, have that mentoring mindset, are able to connect with our kids while they're in schools, as well as our mentoring connector, which is the only national database that's able to connect prospective mentors with programs. So if you're not in the mentoring connector, get in there. If that's confusing to you, email me. We manage our local database here in Mentoring NDC, in that elevating the field. So highlighting your voices, highlighting our young people's voices, doing that advocacy again with our legislators across the area, and that public awareness as well. So ensuring that not only we know what you're doing, but everyone does, and they should. And I come from programs as well, and I know that is not easy to do. So please let us help you, do that, because people need to know about the work that you're doing. I know it's hard to get the word out there for sure. Some of our kind of standalone resources that our national partner, the National Mentoring Partnership, puts out, those evidence-based resources. So these are standalone guides that exist for you that we aim to also bring to you through these workshops, etc. But we'll send these slides out. These are all clickable links, but these are, again, guides and in-depth resources for you to work through as a staff, or if it's something that you would want to work through with myself or one of our technical assistants, one of our consultants, topics that may apply to your programs. These exist. They're on our website. They're on mentoring.org. I'm going to email them to you. But these are ongoing resources that are amazing. And yeah, if you need assistance working through them, that's what our technical assistance is for, which is at no cost to you. So if that's something you are interested in exploring, again, reach out to me. That's why we're here. And we're literally always here. So here for you. So to jump in, so for our objectives today, it's to gain an understanding of trauma and what it means to be trauma informed as it relates to mentoring relationships, to learn about the 5 elements of developmental relationships, and to apply trauma-informed, developmental, and culturally sensitive relationship strategies in a practical exercise. And what we call our ZORMs, we want to be using the chat box. We want to be respectful and supportive and inquisitive. We invite you to share video if you'd like to. I'll be on video. We will have a breakout activity towards the end where it may be particularly fruitful to have video on for conversation. And particularly for this topic, of course, space and grace, I asked for that. So I will say with this type of workshop, it starts out information heavy. And of course, I'm going to use the word heavy in two different ways. It starts out information heavy, and it is a heavy topic, right? We're talking about trauma. So hold that space and grace for yourself as well. And in this front kind of part of this workshop where I'll be sharing a lot of information to you, I want you to also give space for your own reactions. And I'm hoping to also give you space for your own reactions as well. So feel free to, or I hope you will, give me your reactions in the chat as well. Raise your hands, we can have conversations, drop your questions in the chat as well. Again, a lot of this is about gaining the knowledge, and then we'll get to the part where we talk about what we're going to do now that we know these things, because a lot of it, of what we'll find out about being trauma informed, is the being informed part, getting the information first before we talk about what we can do with it. So we're going to get that information first, which is a lot to take in. I want to give you space and grace to do that, and then we will do that application part towards the end. So again, I want to give you space and grace, but please utilize the chat box. Let me know how you're feeling. Yeah, it can be shocking information. I don't love it. Don't love trauma for sure. As far as my experience and how I came to know this information, as far as getting into the conversation about trauma locally, I've been working in Baltimore for over 10 years in youth development my entire career, but the conversation about trauma in Baltimore City, I think started quite a long time ago. I mean, almost the entire time that I've been in Baltimore City. And I think the Baltimore City Youth Development team, our youth development scene, talked about it kind of early, as far as it may be in other areas of the United States, which I think has been great for Baltimore City. And I'm glad that more people want to talk about it, across Maryland and DC. And at the same time, I am not an expert. How I came to put this training together, the National Mentoring Partnership, I went through a trauma-informed train the trainer, which is where I've pulled this information from. And I was very grateful to go through that training. And this is the most updated information that I have. I would never say that I'm 100% expert in this area. I'm not a trauma therapist or anything of the like. And where I'm able to answer your questions, I will. And where I'm not, I will be honest about that too. And I will aim to get you information offline where I can. So I want to be straightforward about that, of course. So let's jump in. What is trauma? What are we talking about? So we have a few, different definitions here. We'll focus on SAMHSA. So start off the bat with the resource. If you haven't heard of SAMHSA, it's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Great website to peruse if you're just looking for information. But their definition for trauma is: individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So that's a long definition. So what do we need to take from that? So what's important to take from that is trauma is determined by the person, right? So you and I could have the same experience, and only one of us determines it to be a trauma. It doesn't mean that the other person doesn't experience it as negative. Like, we could have the same negative experience, but it's about how we move through it or process it, and whether or not we have those lasting effects, right? So if something negative happens to both of us, but there's only one of us that has those negative lasting effects, then for me, or if that's me, then I'm the one that gets to determine whether that's a trauma, and that's a trauma experience. So even within the same family, two siblings who have the same traumatic experience as a traumatic or negative experience as a child, it might not come to be a true trauma for both of them. And that is something that can be hard to accept or understand on the outside, but that is the reality of how trauma comes to be and can function in different people. And it's not a failure of anyone for one person to experience a trauma from a negative experience, and for another person to to happen to be naturally resilient. There is some kind of people who are born, have natural resilience within them. And we'll actually talk about some kind of things of some resilience and actually trauma that we're born with later on, but that's just kind of how it is. Trauma is determined by the person that it happens to, and that's kind of that. And negative things happen to all of us, and we'll find too later on about how exactly common trauma is as well. Trauma, what is it? There's plenty of examples here on the screen. These are examples for youth and adults. Most of what we'll talk about today can apply to both. This list is far from exhaustive. You may be familiar. Bullying, I want to say as well, I said this the last time I hosted this training, bullying applies to young people and adults as well. And again, this list is not exhaustive, and research also shows that, poverty, and you'll see poverty on the list here, it has a similar impact to the other types of trauma listed on this board. So we're learning new things about different types of experiences that have the same effects of trauma, more like traditional types of trauma that we kind of have an understanding of. So trauma, there's all different kinds, and it reaches a lot of us, young and adults. And I definitely do not want to gloss over race-based trauma, right? So race-based trauma are negative experiences related to a person's race, including discrimination and harassment. So in addition to inequality and access to quality education, healthcare, housing, direct impact of that lack of access, people experiencing race-based trauma become vigilant and attempt to avoid racism and experience ongoing daily stress and worry about race-related issues and that can result in poor mental health and physical health. I'm sure we're all aware, correct me if I'm wrong, but the times are exhausting. And race-based trauma does not just affect adults, right? And for our young people, this type of trauma has the same effects of the trauma we discussed in the previous slide. So let me actually go back. Race-based trauma can be on this list as well. And the effects of these trauma, race-based trauma, same effects. And we'll talk about the effects of trauma on the coming slides. But race-based trauma affects adults and children, has those same kind of negative outputs of poor mental and physical health. And we want to absolutely acknowledge that it's an absolute legitimate form of trauma, and it is ongoing and running rampant. And we talk about what our role as mentors and mentoring programs and the counteracting and disruption of trauma. And we talk about being healing centered, acknowledging being culturally humble and culturally sensitive is a part of that. And acknowledging race-based trauma, is part of our first step in doing that as well. So I absolutely wanted to bring that up. So I mentioned before about, some young people and people are both kind of that natural resilience. That actually goes both ways. That can happen with trauma as well. We can inherit conditions related to the traumatic experiences of our parents. So Dr. Rachel Yehuda, a professor of psychiatry at the Neuroscience of Mount Sinai School of Medicine, she examined the neurobiology of PTSD in Holocaust survivors and their children. So these children were born, excuse me, with low cortisol levels. So cortisol is a stress hormone that helps the body return to a normal condition after trauma. So they were predisposed to experience PTSD symptoms of the previous generation. So they were inheriting those PTSD symptoms from their parents who had been through the Holocaust. So again, like some may inherit resilience to endure trauma, they are actually inheriting the trauma and the PTSD from their parents. Children whose parents had PTSD were 3 times more likely to have PTSD. So passing along this trauma and the effects of trauma. 50 to 70% of those with PTSD also meet the criteria for major depression or another mood or anxiety disorder. And again, going back to race-based trauma, we want to consider the ongoing oppression of African Americans and other oppressed population. By ongoing, I mean years and years of increased stress. When we talk about poverty and economic oppression, what we saw on that first slide about trauma, years and years of exposure to trauma, what can that have? What kind of mental and physical health effects are we talking about for our young people? After years and years, we're no longer young people, for these populations. These are really real effects that we're talking about. And what is our role and what can we do about that? We will talk about. This is not all hopeless. So trauma, is a hidden wound. It can be difficult to understand. And while we can't necessarily see it, we want to remember that it has an impact on the brain. So this photo highlights the difference between a healthy brain and a brain that is in someone who has been abused. In 2011, 2012, which is a little bit of an old data, 35 million of US youth have experienced at least one trauma. That is a lot of people. And you'll hear me continue to talk about that trauma is a bit ubiquitous. And what does that mean for us? And what does that, once we have that information, how can that inform us with what we're going to do? I promise we're going to get to that point, and it's not going to be all just the worst information you ever heard. I promise. But again, this is the information part, and we're getting to it. But let me know how this information is hitting you so far in the chat. So some signs and symptoms and coping mechanisms. So I want you to kind of take a look at this list. Many of these can apply to youth and adults, of course. A lot of these, for those of us who work with young people or have worked with young people, we might consider acting out. And this is where we're going to start applying some actions, right? So I want us to encourage us for those of us who work with young people, to shift our view, right, from bad behavior, poor performance, to an understanding that our youth may be going through something, right? Or something more serious may be going on, right? And additionally, we'll see towards the bottom right here, so some of these positive symptoms in which trauma survivors become high performers to prove their worth. So you may see a youth where things are going great. We can overlook these youth because they're unproblematic. So in the end, really, we want to make assumptions about young people's experiences. If we're just seeing these things, we can't really make assumptions about a young person's experiences or their lack of experiences. There could be no signs at all. When we're seeing these things, we're seeing everything. We can't make assumptions just by seeing these things. So the real point is to not make a judgment, because it could mean a lot of things. If you don't know the history of a child, then you can't really make a judgment at all, because it could go a lot of both ways. And yes, everyone will get the slides in the form of PDF, so don't worry about that. So when we see these things, we can't actually make a lot of determinations about someone's background. That's one. If you have the information about someone's background, about someone's traumatic history, etc., then a lot of these things may make more sense. And then you might actually be able to put some puzzle pieces together. But if we're just seeing these signs and symptoms, we can't actually put things together. And I don't encourage you to do so. And it's not always someone's history and traumatic experiences. That's their information, and it's their personal information. It's their choice to share it with you, right? It's up to them to share that with you, and that's up to them. I want to say another thing about coping mechanisms, and we'll see and the difference between a coping mechanism and a coping skill, because we often talk a lot about in the youth development space about coping skills. So when we talk about coping mechanisms, especially when we're talking about things like trauma, so a coping mechanism is when someone is feeling bad for whatever reason, whether it's trauma, whether they are anxious, depressed, for whatever reason, a coping mechanism is something that someone does, an individual does, to make themselves feel different, period. And that could be a lot of things. So if I'm feeling sad for whatever reason, I'm going to speak very plainly. If I'm feeling sad, my coping mechanism will make me feel different. That mechanism could be a lot of things. I am feeling sad, so I go for a walk. I am feeling sad, so I journal. I am feeling sad, so I smoke a blunt. I am feeling sad, so I do cocaine. I'm feeling sad. What about a mechanism, right? And it was successful because it made me feel different. A skill would be something, a positive, in that it doesn't harm me when I do it. That's a difference between a coping skill and a coping mechanism. A mechanism is just that it was successful in making me feel different. So if you're working with a young person, or you know someone who's having those struggles with a coping mechanism maybe we don't understand, like substance abuse, or inappropriate sexual behavior, or inappropriate relationships with someone, those we cannot understand these negative coping mechanisms, right? We have to understand that for that person, if it's making them feel different, then it was a successful coping mechanism for them. We don't understand it because we're not feeling that negative emotion they felt before they engaged in this coping mechanism. And I always want to frame that for people because it is really hard to understand when we see people who are engaged in things like really destructive drug use or destructive habits and destructive relationships. I mean, if you're in a relationship with that person, a young person, a family member, etc., that's really painful for everyone involved. But I like to remind people of that. If someone's engaging in something that is painful, that puts their relationships at risk, etc., they are in even more pain. If they're engaging in something that is this coping mechanism that is so painful, that's making them feel better, even a little bit better than how negative they were feeling before. So that's the difference between a coping mechanism and a coping skill. So when we're talking about with young people and positive coping skills, I mean, a coping skill, again, is a coping mechanism that does not harm them, but makes them feel differently, makes them feel better. And I wanted to bring that up here because coping mechanisms and coping skills are really important when we're talking about trauma, or or any young person over the course of their teenagerdom, at least, is going to be coping with negative feelings and the like. So I want to bring that up here because there's likely going to be a time when you're going to be working with a young person or in a relationship with someone who's using a coping mechanism that is difficult to understand, that is negative, and you want to be coaching them to use something positive. So I always like to bring that up here because it is difficult to understand. I see Mariel's comments. I might not have seen that science may present different as someone ages and deals with the trauma. Absolutely, right. So over the course of years or over the course of treatment and the like, these things can all look different, and the scope of trauma looks quite different as well, which we'll see here in this next slide. So drop one in the chat, you've heard of the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences is a 10-question survey typically asked of adults about their childhood experiences. These are the 10 things here on the slides. We're not going to do the study. I'm not going to drop a link to it. You can Google it. And I'll get to that in a second. So there's been tons of studies done on the ACEs, and really what it comes down to is that no matter the population that thanks Amber, I saw your message. No matter the population that do ACEs studies are, what they come to find is that most people, no matter their race, age, economic background, etc., have one or more ACE. White people, Black people, rich people, poor people, highly educated people, less educated people, typically have one or more ACE. They also find the more ACEs you have, 2, 3, 4, however many, the more your risk goes up of certain chronic diseases, a higher risk of more mental illnesses, and the worse the poorer life outcomes go up. All those things go up. You'll also notice that here on, this isn't the questionnaire, but the 10 questions on the questionnaire to go to this, that this does not even cover all traumas, right? Not even all of the possible traumas are captured here on the kind of the ACE questionnaire. So I bring this up for a few reasons. One, I imagine that the conversation around ACEs is going to change with the experiences of traumas changing and expanding, and that trauma is so ubiquitous that this one survey just does not capture enough specific information anymore. Two, the reason that I don't drop a link and the like is that this is a tool that should really only be, no, that period should only be used by professionals and in a professional setting. I'm not a professional. You should not be giving this survey to anyone either. And so I'm not recommending that anybody do that. Please do not do that. But really, I share for that understanding that when this survey is shared widely, it is an understanding that the majority of us share one or more trauma. And what does that mean in how we treat each other and how we are in community with each other, which kind of leads me into this next video I'm about to show you. And I'm going to ask for your reactions in the chat. And if for some reason you can't hear, etc., give me a signal, let me know.
Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need, and just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families. By changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting. By providing quality care and education early in life. By enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development. And by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
Yeah, so tell me your thoughts. Feel free to come off mute, drop in the chat. I see Jamie's message in the chat, which is, let's scroll up. So some areas do not have this anymore. I do remember having this in my community. A lot of parents don't know it's because of lack of resources, and some programs come with the cost. Other thoughts and reflections from this video, y'all? Smash says, really happy the organization I work with implements all those steps at the end for the population we work with. Wonderful. I'm happy too. Where do you were Generation Hope, Ashley?
Yeah, I work with Generation Hope, and we do all of those things like talking about positive parenting, intervening and mentoring and all that good stuff.
Cool. I recognize because you're in the LGBT cohort and I saw your application. Talk to you tomorrow. Wonderful. Yes, what I do like about this video is, and why it makes the ACE relevant, because it talks about the prevention of ACEs, right? So much we talk about what we're doing in reaction to, and when we talk about prevention, it's this whole other, it frames the conversation in a more hopeful way so much of the time too. And I think for those often in our space, we're not in conversation with people, with those who work in very early childhood education, and those who work in the really super early, all that early childhood stuff, and that 0 to 4 period of child's life. There's so much data that says about how important that time is, and that's all that prevention kind of stuff. Video versus how much we need to reimagine human services and how much we perceive and provide new services. Yes. I bet I worked in the community school environments, training the family with assets and support to make a tremendous difference. Yeah. Absolutely. Wouldn't it be great if the community took ACEs and provided positive prevention supports and education?
Miss Renee, this is Stephanie.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We have a program kind of like that in the school system where I'm at, but it's a little different. We, for example, we have a backpack giveaway in the beginning of the school year, and different things throughout the school year we try to implement with the children as needed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And one day we did a canned food drive. Little things. It's what you're doing right here, what you're implementing. Some of it I wish we could do at our school.
Right. Yeah.
Without showing my emotions. It's really touching.
Yeah, it is. And it's a lot. I think it too. Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements of this video that a lot of us try to do. And community schools work, I know a lot are involved in, and community school coordinators are amazing. Anybody who's going to come to the Maryland United for Youth conference, we are gonna our award category is going to be announced soon, and there is going to be you are going to be able to nominate your community school coordinator of the year. So if you have somebody in mind, nomination will be open all of August. I don't know why I'm spoiling this. This is going to be announced soon. Anyway, But I know some people are thinking about the scope of work, and especially when we connect this to this is a trauma prevention. And now we're talking about this other side of it, all this information about the impacts of trauma. It's huge. And now we're going to talk about, now the trauma's happened, what can be done about it, and what the role of mentoring is about it. So now we're going to get into that. So not all hope is lost yet, guys. I promise. Okay. So as far as treatment, and again, we'll talk about the mentoring part of it, but in like the practical part of it. So therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoeducation, emotional regulation, coping skills, again, different the coping mechanisms, including family, parent education, ideally including for young people, school counselors and guidance counselors. When we're including school counselors, reminding that this is probably more educationally focused. A school counselor or a guidance counselor is not therapy. They're depending where you are at in different school systems. Some schools do have school psychologists and the like. We want to, if you are a mentor or a mentoring program that's able to advocate on behalf of youth, being able to delineate who exactly you're talking to within a school system, because there's a school social worker, there might be a school psychologist who's in your school twice a week, and people who are providing different kinds of services with different kinds of titles. So being able to delineate who can exactly do what, but in the school, when we're talking about people in the school who were able to advocate for a young person, really focused on barriers to learning, school success, and potentially these are more brief and less structured and scheduled. Again, potentially we're talking about for here in the blue, potentially a support group. So maybe a group that's more age specific or trauma specific, in this grand scope of trauma that we're talking about, that might be appropriate for the person who has experienced trauma. And then over here in the teal, kind of talking about an inpatient treatment situation. So this may be sought out if the symptoms are becoming unbearable, if the coping mechanisms are becoming insufficient or they're becoming negative, if the effects of trauma are having an impact on daily functioning, extreme anxiety or depression, suicidality, health issues, relational problems. This could be something that's even court ordered. So ideally, we're not getting there, but for some, that could be where it goes, and we want to get people the help they need. So that might be something that, again, if we have to advocate for someone, it could be an appropriate type of treatment for someone in regards to their trauma. I want to bring up medication, mostly as a destigmatizing thing. So medication for treating mental health and trauma in general. So most importantly, medication is not a singular solution, should be combined with therapy and a lot of the things that we talked about on the previous slide. Again, it typically has to do with the regulation and stabilization of treatment or of symptoms, and again allows for more progress with the counseling and of counseling and like I talked about on the previous slide, medication taken as directed will still take many weeks for results. And again, I bring it up because there is stigma to it, and often if someone is not, if you were in an advocacy position for someone who is navigating treatment and they're able to, we're going to talk about barriers to treatment in the next slide, but if there's limit to accessing treatment and they're only able to access medication but not therapy, or therapy but not medication, we want to talk about the combination of both is more powerful than one. So wanted to bring that up here. So I keep saying things are going to get better, and then I just keep bringing up things that are kind of bummer. Anyway, limitation and challenges. I mean, we want to be realistic here about what those are. And I mean, so again, we can look out for them. And again, if we're in an advocacy position, which many times in mentor roles and program roles too, because I know in the program role, when we are people to provide resources, we're making those referrals and the like, we want to be mindful of what those challenges are so we can make proper referrals. So Not every child is going to receive counseling. So even when a child may be in a position where they are in children's services or foster care or the like, we may make an assumption that they will have easier access to services. That's just not the case. So we don't want to make those assumptions, and we want to be following up and the like. And the reality is that there is a shortage of therapists, and that will contribute to lack of access, specifically as it was specifically as it informs to child therapists, trauma therapists, as it's a specific training, and especially right now, there's a high burnout of therapists, etc. My best friend happens to be a child trauma therapist, so I feel like I'm in like a weird bubble where I'm like, child trauma therapists, they're just around. But like, I mean, she's the only one I know, and maybe the only one like within like 20 miles, as far as I'm aware. But there's a very real shortage of therapists and a very real shortage of like meaningful training for trauma, especially. So, and all these things have been exacerbated by the past 2 years. So, we want to be mindful and patient when we are making, we're trying to potentially refer someone to find a therapist, because the process of vetting a therapist and all those things can take time, and it is often worth it to wait to find the right one, for sure. And for adults, many adults do not seek treatment. Stigma, wait lists, lack of access, lack of insurance, all those things can really slow down the process. And even for myself, most of those things have slowed me down in seeking treatment as well. Wait lists, lack of access, being kicked off insurance, like Marisol bringing up language barriers, absolutely. Trauma therapists, absolutely. All these things. If there's a slowing down and you are feeling impatient because you have experienced trauma, that can bring things to an absolute stop. And we're bringing up language barriers, culturally sensitive trauma therapy in general. There are cultural related issues as far as to BIPOC being diagnosed at higher rates. African Americans in general specifically have a long and repetitive history of being abused by systems of care, which obviously causes distrust. Here in Baltimore, there's a long and tenuous relationship with Johns Hopkins. So if you're not familiar with these histories, wherever you may be located, become familiar. And as a result, in this area and across, BIPOC tend to use these treatment at a much lower rate. So there's a lack of cultural competency and sensitivity in practitioner behavior and therapeutic approaches, which makes, again, hard for potential patients to, find a therapist that looks like them, or there might be, negative beliefs about formal therapy that could be cultural related, depending where someone's come from. So these are some of the barriers. An immediate resource here in Maryland, the Black Mental Health Alliance has a database of Black mental health practitioners that people can refer people to. So, that is one single resource. And they also do, if there happen to be any providers or practitioners on the call, they do professional development for practitioners and cultural competency for practitioners as well. So that is a singular resource that I am familiar with. And those people are amazing and the like as well, but we need much, much more, of course. So this is a gap, but in the end, we need to get people treatment and the like. So if you're in an advocacy position, standing by someone as they are climbing this mountain can be a really important role. And outside of that, however you may be able to advocate in the larger scope can be really important for people. So it's an uphill battle, but very, very important. Cool. So kind of the idea of misdiagnosis and misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis. So you may know this from the screen and from what you may know. So there's there's a lot of these disorders and the like, and in general, a lot of these things have overlapping of symptoms. So if the provider is not trauma informed, you might be diagnosed with something that is not actually your experience. If you're not trauma informed, some of these things might look like ADHD instead of PTSD. Right? Mismanaged ADHD can look like depression or anxiety, depending on who you are. So, and if you are working with a therapist who does not have a lot of time to spend with you, or with a therapist who refers you to a psychiatrist to medicate you, and you're not getting that therapy, you could be in a loop where you're just not getting the services that you need. So it's important that and aware that we're not therapists are not all trauma trained, that we're vetting these therapists, etc. And again, that we consider these opportunities to continue to be advocates for the youth that we serve, and or mentor, because we know too that with these misdiagnoses or overdiagnoses, that again, our youth become labeled and judged alike. And throughout this process, what we're really trying to push everybody towards is to, be curious, less judgmental, ask more questions, and to make space for our young people to tell us what their stories are, and for us to make space for them to be who they are and tell us who they are. Okay, before we get into this, I want to drop what is a very important document into the chat. So you will need this document to do our final activity, and yes, in the trauma caused by COVID-19, which is another ongoing trauma that it's still happening. It's not over. 1 million people have died. And for some people have lost people. So we're all having different effects from it. Really good point. So I'm now going to be referring to some things that are in this document. So open that, you can download that, keep it, that link will remain live forever. So now we want to talk about, now we're getting into mentoring and what are these kind of positive aspects and what we're going to do here. So the research is consistent that mentors, caring adults can positively impact youth. That's why we're doing it. That's what we're doing. And we can be even more effective when we are trauma informed, when we are developmental, which we're going to talk about more, and when we're culturally sensitive. So we're doing it. We're getting there. We're going to start with the end time. We're going to get into now what being developmental means. So to effectively mentor, I want our mentors to be developmental to increase protective factors and assets. So a protective factor is essentially the opposite of a risk factor. And there's a whole list of protective factors in, excuse me, in that document, essentially. But we're talking about the difference between a developmental mentor and a prescriptive mentor, right? So developmental mentors ask questions as much as possible, even when they're teaching a mentee something, right? We can do it by asking questions. We want to be listening more than we're talking. We want to step back from learning sometimes and just enjoy being with our mentee. Like we can enjoy just getting to know them, which is really important for our young people's identity development. We want to remember that too, that our mentee is getting to know themselves. They're just a young little person. And us getting to know them is part of them getting to know themselves as well, which is really important. I think my husband's coming home. My dog's about to bark, just to be aware. Okay, he's like, all right. And part of our relationship is just to be there for them and to support them in developing their needed skills. Mentors are not, oh my God. Can you take him out of the room? The dog is coming closer to me, but still behind me. Okay, he's left. Okay. He's one of those, like, when someone comes in, he doesn't bark and go towards them. He barks, but then goes further away. He's away. Anyway, as mentors, we're not there to fix our mentees and their problems. We want to facilitate opportunities for our mentees to identify and express what they want to achieve, and let them to define their sex and their success and choose their goals. So again, this is what we mean by being developmental versus being prescriptive. And the same goes with them, whether they're going to tell us their trauma story or not, letting them take ownership of that. So we want to be developmental. Now we're getting into this space. We're developmental, we're building these protective factors, and we're helping them build their own identity. So we're there, we're doing it. We got it. We're developmental. I want to make sure you guys have time for our activity. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question right now. So here as we're talking about developmental, we're also talking about parental relationship and taking into consideration, and this also has to do with avoiding the risk of re-traumatization as well, but taking into consideration where we are in the mentoring journey. So for those who may be in relationship with young people, whether that's as a staff member or as a mentor mentee, where are you in your relationship? We're taking a look at this guide here. So, review the stages, because we want to keep in mind that depending on where we are in a relationship, that should be guiding our actions and the things that we say. And when we think about being developmental away, it's really, when I keep saying being developmental, everything we're talking about is really about being intentional. So yeah, for those who are in a relationship with young people, does anybody want to speak to kind of what stage they're at with some young people and kind of share an example? You can drop in the chat, but feel free to come off mute.
I would say I'm currently in stages 1, 3, and 4 with different members of my caseload. We just started over the fiscal year, so we are introducing a new cohort to our program. So I'm kind of getting, having my first meetings with them, and their children this month, and then some of them I've known for about a year or so.
Yeah.
So I feel like we have that deep bond and connection. And I'm saying goodbye to some people who just graduated. So.
Yeah. Right. And you wouldn't approach each of them the same exact way, right?
Oh no.
Exactly right. It would be weird. It would be weird. It would be weird to be super chummy with a kid you just met. It wouldn't be right. And a kid would tell you as such, and they should, because they just will, but also don't do that. Some kids will be down, there will be the kid that will just sit down. I did a match once, and I was like, she's really going to talk your ear off as soon as you sit down. And they met, and she just talked for an hour. But not every kid is like that. You have to know. And if you're a mentor coming in, you don't know. So we need to take these things into mind and consider those things. I believe there's a different looking chart in your packet, which we will take a look at. But again, in general, especially for those of us who are in structured relationships, take into mind that, especially for those that there is a manufacturing relationship, a manufacturing element into these relationships. There's a whole aspect of the element of effective practice called matching. We try to make a science out of this as much as we can because we want it to be successful, and that's okay, of course. But the reality is, it just takes patience. We need to be patient, and while you're being patient, take that time to be thoughtful and intentional, and just to take that time to be intentional and to consider what you're going to do and say. And the likelihood is, when you do that, you'll be more successful as time moves on. So this is the developmental relationship framework, which was put together by Search Institute. If you're not familiar with them, go to their website, another website I'm going to promote. But these are the 5 elements that they put tons of research into, that the research says make more powerful relationships for young people. So when you do these things, it makes your relationship with a young person stronger and stronger. Again, this is in that document that I shared. I'm just going to drop the link again really quick. So expressing care, showing a young person that you matter to, that they matter to you, providing support, helping them reach their goals, challenging their growth, sharing power with them, which is often difficult for us old people, and expanding possibilities. So this next chart, which is also in that document, gives you an idea. So you see here at the top was those 4 stages of the relationship. And over here on the left side is the relationship framework. And it says, when is it appropriate to do these things, right? So from the get-go, you should be dependable and listening. right? From the get-go, you should be respectful and including them, right? And some things are less appropriate to do right from the beginning, right? Challenging growth. We gotta wait a few stages in, because you're coming, day one and you're immediately challenging. That's inauthentic. This kid knows you don't know them, and why, right? Of course, there will always be outliers in every situation, of course, but it's a risk. What we're saying is that it's a risk, and it's unintentional and risky to do that. So if we're going to give the science to it, this is a great tool and to use when we're thinking about where we are in the relationship, who my kid is, how can I use this framework to implement and use the elements of the framework. So I love the developmental relationship framework. We could literally spend 90 minutes just on that. If you ever do, let me know in the evaluation survey, because I love doing that training. But I love this even more. I never seen this before until I did the trauma-informed training. But yeah, this is such a great way to think about the timeline, about when is kind of appropriate to push the boundaries, to try out some of these things and use some of these tools. I think it's really, really effective. So I'm going to play a quick video. If anybody was anybody here who's with me on the cultural humility training, I'm about to play the cultural humility video, which is kind of the last, kind of the triad of being trauma informed, developmental, and culturally humble. When we talk about the three things that can really make mentoring trauma informed and healing centered. I'm going to play the video. This is could be a whole another 90 minutes. And I don't want to spend too much time on it today, because we recently just did this training and it's on our YouTube. Please watch it. But this is kind of a great 2 minutes to take away and share this video with anybody. I think it's amazing, actually. But this is, the reality is, we want to be aware of our cultural differences with our young people, and without kind of assigning value, what's better or worse and the like. So yeah, Curtis, I'm gonna email this all out. I'm gonna play this video and then we'll get back to it.
Becoming a better mentor. Strategies to be there for young people. Practicing cultural humility. Cultural humility is an ongoing, lifelong process of self-reflection and learning about how social identity and experiences are shaped by systems of oppression, power, and privilege. Social identity is a person's sense of who they are based on their group membership, which can reflect physical, social, and mental characteristics and can be self-claimed or ascribed by others. Everyone has multiple social identities. As such, cultural humility is important in all mentoring relationships, even if mentors and mentees are similar in important characteristics, like race or gender, because there are likely many other ways that they differ. Cultural humility is grounded in continuous self-reflection. This involves asking questions about and exploring the many ways you define yourself. For example, your race, gender, class, ability, sexuality, and religion, and what those identities mean in the context of the power structures in the United States. Cultural humility also involves an ongoing process of learning about your mentee. Actively seek opportunities to learn about your mentee's culture, and when warranted and invited, to participate in that culture. You may also explore how systems of oppression and privilege shape your mentee's experiences. The more you understand this, the more you will be able to offer meaningful support. Cultural humility is not cultural competence, which many people confuse. Cultural competence assumes that there is an endpoint in learning, that you can simply observe and read about another culture, then you are done. This attitude could lead mentors to be overconfident in their relationships with youth. Cultural humility is also not colorblindness. Some Americans grew up believing that seeing race is a form of prejudice and discrimination in and of itself, and even mentioning a person's race is racist. Color blindness creates a discomfort around individuals who are racially different from you because they may feel that they can't bring their full self into a relationship. You can start building your cultural humility by reflecting on questions such as, how do my social identities shape my worldview and experiences? How have systems of privilege and oppression shaped my own identities and experiences? How do I make space in my mentoring interactions for my mentee to express their own identities? Committing and actively engaging in a process of ongoing self-reflection and learning about your own social identity is the key in being a mentor who is culturally humble. See the full chapter at mentoring.org/bettermentor for more tips on how you can be a better mentor.
So yeah, if you're not in the resource, also need to there's a whole chapter literally about this. Absolutely important. If you want to dive deeper, I'll send the link to the full webinar in my follow-up as well. But are really important. I mean, I brought up how it is important, you know, for trauma therapists, et cetera, to be culturally sensitive as well. Obviously, that holds true for mentoring as well. So, okay, we've done the first three things. We understand trauma is widespread. We're recognizing the signs and symptoms. We're in the response, and now we're going to avoiding re-traumatization. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but some easy things that we can do. And in that document I sent, there is a tip sheet there as well. And I'll remind that you will get the slides. But being consistent, when we think about trauma survivors often have experienced some form of abandonment. Consistency ensures that we're not re-traumatizing by abandoning again. Predictability. The nature of trauma is often that you did not have an experience of control, right? So predictability can be very comforting to the like. So avoiding unpredictability is really important. You know, setting clear boundaries and expectations, and avoiding, you know, significant or unexpected changes, and if possible, providing notice, so you're able to allow your young person, you know, to make internal adjustments and the like. You know, offering choices, that control aspect again. So, giving your young person choices about the environment that they're in, and also going back to that sharing power issue as well, helping them to avoid a sense of powerlessness. That being non-judgmental thing I keep bringing up. You know, the experience of trauma often includes a lot of judgment and criticism from others and from themselves as well. There can be a lot of stigmas attached to the traumatic experience, or for some of the symptoms and coping mechanisms that follow. So the easiest, I believe it can be one of the easiest things that we can do, you know, is to be non-judgmental and to come from there. So be non-judgmental. Maybe one of the hardest things, having a non-judgmental face. This could be one of the harder things for us to do, to keep judgments off our face. So starting there as well. Identifying and avoiding triggers. So if this is something that doesn't necessarily, triggers don't necessarily apply to everyone with trauma, but if it comes to be that a young person you work with does have triggers, identifying what those are, and, you know, learning about them for your young person, and learning how to avoid them, and helping them do that, which is something that we could something you can explore with them deeper. If we're forcing or demanding an action, again, avoiding that kind of controlling aspect and that powerlessness. So, and again, being calm and controlled in your behavior. You are the adult in the situation. So we need to be able to, you know, show up in a way that is predictable for them, and is safe for them as well. And as adults, that's our responsibility as well. So Marisol says, why may empathetic, always remember our experience and trauma may be different, not the same as our youth and or certain youth is experiencing. Totally, Marisol. And even it mentioned that cultural humility video, right? Like while you may share a lot with your mentee, identity experiences, being from the same community, it doesn't mean your experiences are the same. It just doesn't. So let your mentee tell you what their experiences are, and be non-judgmental in that fact. Okay, cool. All right, so we are now about to move into our activity. Cool. So in the document I sent you, there's 3 wonderful children, Keisha, Brian, and Kim. And we're going to move into breakout rooms based on Keisha, Brian, and Kim. And this is your assignment when you're in the room. And I'll actually, Zoom has a thing now where you can project this into your room. So essentially, you're going to read their story and apply what you've learned to how you would handle, not how you would handle, but how you might approach mentoring them, considering what we know about them and now what we know about being trauma informed, being developmental, and taking their cultural experience into consideration. So, seeing who's left on the call, I think we can just do 3 rooms and have it be cozy. Nope, that's too many. Okay, I'm going to pause our recording. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right, let me know. How'd it go? How are we going to help Keisha and Brian and Kim? Feel free to come off mute. Anybody from any group, just let me know who you're working with, how we're feeling now that we're more trauma informed and developmental, etc. Somebody from Keisha group share. Oh, Amber, here we go. Grateful for the conversation. Again, sounds like some great things going on. So Amber, which group are you in?
I'm sorry, I don't know the name of my group. I didn't even look. I was just listening.
So Brittany and I talked a little bit about Keisha. I don't know if that's the person we were assigned. But we were talking about just first of all, that friendly, like getting to know her, and just being considerate of her relationship with her mother and how that's affecting her, and eventually getting to understand, like, first of all, asking her, like, what do you like about school? Like, what are your favorite things? Da, da, da. And then when you get to know her, asking, well, like, what happened? Like, why, like, figuring out what's triggering her to have fights and altercations in school. Is it the teacher is being, like, reminding her of someone, being disrespectful? Is it the kids? Like, Brittany brought up, as an African-American woman, she grew up and how everybody would be talking and knowing. So if your mother had, like, a drug problem, and, like, at least in her experience, that people might be talking in the neighborhood, or you see people, and so the kids at school might know about Keisha's situation and be making fun of her or something,
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of just what we talked about.
Great. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And so know that this is a resource now in your guide, and something that, but their stories are quite detailed and something you could potentially, work through with your staff, with your mentors as an example. They're quite fruitful to work through and to use as examples or situations and scenarios to to play on and to write further scenarios and the like to work through the 5 elements and to practice, right? to practice out some of the to do that application. So I want to share those and for you to actually have those and be able to take those with you. So that is in that takeaway. And I do want to share this out. And again, this will be here. So what I love about Search Institute is that, as part of their research, they actually interview young people and, they are quoted here about why they, how developmental relationships affect them and why they like them. So I think young people is why we do the work. And when they say it works, that means it works. To me, that's the best evidence right there. Stan said Emma talked about how responsible Kim has been, and not judging her for using marijuana as a coping mechanism. Great. Try and build her peer-to-peer provide assistance additionally. Great, wonderful. Right. I love that about not being judgmental of coping mechanisms, right, at first, and helping her figure out finding a coping skill that might maybe less harmful for her. Perfect, wonderful. Let's skip over to the next slide really quick. So wrapping up, it's 5:28. Things coming up at Mentor Maryland, DC. If you're not aware, we have our Youth at Center event coming up next week, next Thursday. This one-day event is designed for mentor organizations in the DC and surrounding DC metro region. This event will be truly centering young people. We'll feature youth speakers, youth panelists, and really using young people as subject matter experts. And it'll be time for youth development professionals in attendance to network and to listen to young people and the like. So it's an all-day event. There will be an after party at the Brewing Company. There is a hold fee to register, but if you attend, you get the whole fee back, or if you have to cancel, events will be canceled in 48 hours, you get your whole fee back. So it's just a reservation fee basically, but you will get that money back, if that makes sense. The event is free. So I'll send out again the links and the like for all this, so you have that information. But if you are in that area, please join us. That is next week, and that will be put on by us and our partner Fair Chance DC. So I hope to see you there. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here. I will ensure that you get all of this information tomorrow. PDF. You'll get the PDF that I sent. I'll send it again. And this recording will be on YouTube soon, and as well as all our past recordings. Our recording about cultural humility as well. And it's exactly 5:30. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you for spending the time, and hopefully see you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Thank you.